Graders, it's Mrs. Thompson. We are going to work in section 8.5. We're about halfway through this chapter 8. It's a very long chapter, so that's why we split it up into two pieces. You should have finished your 8.1, 8.4 test the day before recently, and now we're going to hit to the other side of this. On the peak, we've hit the peak, and now we're getting ready to come down the hill. Today's objective, we are going to solve quadratic equations by graphing. So I'm going to physically graph some very difficult quadratics for you, show you how it's done by hand, and then I'm going to show you how to do it with your calculator. So if you don't have your calculator, go ahead and grab it, and I'm going to show you the keying sequence a little bit later. Right now, the first two we're going to do by hand, and I'm going to take you through step by step, okay? Now, example 1. Solving quadratic equations by graphing. Anytime that they tell you to solve a quadratic equation, really what they're asking you for is what are the zeros? What are the zeros? Okay? And so anyway, we can use a graph to help us identify this. We really can. So let me show you how it's done. We're going to solve 2x squared minus 2 equals 0. Now that's the same thing as y equals 2x squared minus 2. We just replaced y with 0 because the x-intercept, remember, is always some number and y is 0 in an x-intercept, always. Okay? So remember, x-intercepts are always some number, but the y is always 0. Okay? So that's why we zero out the y, in case you were wondering. So we need to calculate the following and plan our graph. So the first thing we need to do is calculate our axis of symmetry. So our axis of symmetry, remember, we find that by doing negative b over 2a. This is a vertical line that separates our graph into two halves. So negative b, well, I don't have a b. Remember, in this particular equation, I've got the 2x squared. I do not have a middle term, but I do have a constant number. So what I have here is negative 1 times 0, which of course is 0, and 2a would be 2 times 2, which is 4. And 0 divided by 4 is still 0. So this is actually going to run right through the center 0. Okay? It's a vertical line through 0, which is basically the y-axis. Okay? Now to find our vertex, we already know the x of our vertex is 0. Remember, axis of symmetry is the same number that's the x of your vertex. So you're going to go back to your original equation, and you're going to plug in 0 for anywhere you see an x. Okay? Now 0 squared is 0. 0 times 2 is still 0. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. So our vertex is going to start at negative 2. Okay? So right now, let's go ahead and get this thing graphed. We know it's going to open up because the coefficient 2 in front of your x squared is positive. So we know it's going to open up. So that probably will help us figure out how to get this graph started. Okay? So here we go. Just kind of go with me here. Take your time. And let's graph what we do know. We know the vertex is 0, negative 2. And our axis of, and I'm going to change colors just to make it stand out a little bit. Our axis of symmetry is actually the y-axis, which is x equals 0. The y-axis, believe it or not, is an equation, which is x equals 0. The x-axis is the equation y equals 0, believe it or not. Okay, now what we need to do is come up with some other points, okay? And I'm going to show you a really neat trick to find these other points. Here we go. We need to find, let's see here, let's plug in positive 1 and positive 2 for our x's. Let's just see what happens, okay? So you're going to go back to your original equation, 2x squared minus 2, and we're going to plug in first the 1, we're going to plug in 1 for the x. 1 squared is 1, 1 times 2 is 2, 2 minus 2 is 0. So here's one of our points, and that's actually one of my zeros because it's on the x-axis, isn't it? And then I'm going to plug in 2, and 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 minus 2 is 6. And there's a second point. So I'm going to find 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There it is. Okay? So I actually have half of my parabola right here. Now, the really cool thing is I don't need to calculate the other points. I can just reflect the 2 points I just found. So let's start here with our x-intercept. It's on the x-axis, therefore it's an x-intercept. It's a 0, and I'm 1 unit from the midline. Okay, do you see that? Here I am, and I just bumped over here 1 place. So go 1 place over to the left of it, and there's my other point. I need to calculate that. Okay, and then come up here to our 2, 6. We are 2 units away from the midline, so we're going to go 2 units to the other side and mark it. So here's our graph. Okay, there it is in all its glory. And can we use the graph to find our zeros? Absolutely, we sure can. And so our zeros, that's what they're asking us to find. We have 2 of them because our parabola crosses at 2 places. Our 2 zeros are going to be positive and -1. Pretty amazing. Okay? So that's how you physically hand graph it. Now, we're not going to sit there and do this forever. We really are not. We're going to let the calculator do a lot of this work for us. So I just want to make sure that you know how to do it by hand. We're going to do a couple in class, and I'm going to do one more with you. So flip the page. This time we have negative x squared minus 4x minus 4. We know it's going to go down because a is -1. And if a is ever negative, that means the parabola will open down. All right, now axis of symmetry. Remember, we're going to do negative b over 2a. Okay, b is -4, so we're going to take the opposite of -4 and divide that by 2 times -1. Well, the opposite of -4 is +4. 2 times -1 is -2. 4 divided by -2 is -2. So your axis of symmetry is going to go through, vertical line through -2 on the x. Now your vertex is going to be -2 something, and we have to calculate what that something is. So we have -1 times, and then x. Well, x is -2. Squared minus 4 times -2 minus 4. Okay? -2 squared is +4. That's where we start. And then we need to do some multiplication. Okay? So -1 times 4 is -4. -4 times -2 is +8. And then drop down that -4. And then we have -4 plus 8 is 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. You could have plugged all that into your calculator on one line and figured that out. If you don't have your calculator, we still can figure it out. We just have to follow order of operations. So our vertex is going to rest on -2, 0. So we know it's going to go down. We're going to start at -2, 0. So I'm going to start fairly high up on this little graph paper I gave you. Here we go. And I'm going to mark my vertex at -2, 0. I know it's going to open down. That's why I made it so bottom heavy with showing a lot of the 3rd and 4th quadrants. Okay? So I'm going to draw my vertical line all the way down. There it is. It literally splits my graph in half. Okay? And then I'm going to just do a real quick XY table, and I'm going to plug in a couple of points. So I think I'm going to do 0 and -1. Okay? 0, when I plug in 0, that zeroes out my -x squared, that zeroes out my -4x, and all I'm left with is -4. Okay? So 0, -4. 1, 2, 3, and there it is. Now I can go ahead and reflect that. I'm 2 units away from the midline, so go 2 units to the other side. And there I've just reflected it. That looks great. Okay, let's plug in -1. Be real careful when you plug that in. Remember, when you plug it in, use your parentheses. Anytime you're squaring a negative number, use those parentheses so you don't get it and don't miss it. Okay, so negative 1 squared is positive 1. The opposite of 1 is negative 1. Minus 4 times negative 1, that's positive 4 minus 4. Okay, negative 1 plus 4 is 3. 3 minus 4 is negative 1. Okay, you could have just put that in your calculator. I didn't take the time to do that. So here's where the next one is. It's 1 unit from the midline, so I'm going to go 1 unit to the other side, and I've just reflected that point. So here's the graph. Looks great. That's gorgeous. And now, can you clearly see where the 0 is? We only have 1 0. And when that situation arises, that's because our 0 is also our vertex. That's the only time when you will see a vertex as a 0 is when it crosses 1 time. Okay? So our 0 is at negative 2 in this particular case, and we only have 1 of them. And that answers that question. All right, so get your calculators handy. We're going to be working with x squared plus 5 equals 4x. The first thing I've instructed you to do is write the equation in standard form. It's just not quite in the right form. We cannot put this in our calculator just yet. It's not ready. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the 4x. We're going to subtract it from each side. Notice on the left side that none of those numbers are like terms. So we're just going to literally write it in descending order, starting with x squared minus 4x plus 5. That is standard form. And here's our equation. This part right here is what we're going to be plugging into our calculator. Okay? So I'm going to switch over to camera mode now. Here we go. And let me get my calculator on so the screen shows up nice and cool. I just want you to be able to see the screen real good. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our y equals, and I got to clear out some data. This was actually a previous video that I did with you guys. And actually, before we do that, hit second mode. That'll quit the screen, and check your window. Okay, now my window is set with some weird numbers. Okay, and I was specific. I did another problem where I just needed first quadrant, so I adjusted the numbers. If you want to go back to the original settings, then this is what you're going to do. Okay, let me slide the calculator up just a little bit so you can follow the keying sequence. Okay, I'm going to kind of zoom out. All right, what you're going to do is hit second and then the enter sign. Okay, I'm sorry, second and then the plus sign. We want to hit the memory part of this. We just want to do a real quick reset. So press 7 and then 1 and then 2. So it's second plus sign 7, 1, 2. And then it'll clear your RAM. I'll clear that screen and I'll hit the window again. And these are the original factory settings. Okay, where we're going to see all 4 quadrants. The x is going to go down to negative 10 and go up to positive 10 by 1s. The y is going to go down to negative 10 and up to positive 10 and also go by 1. So this is where you can, if you want to zoom in on something, you can adjust it here or use your zoom button, which I am going to show you how to do. So again, if you want to reset that window, you've adjusted it, you got some weird numbers in there, you want to get it back to factory setting, hit second plus sign 7, 1, 2. 7 on the first screen, 1 on the next screen, and 2 on the last screen, and it'll just clear the RAM and reset it. That is also true for any glitches. If you're like, I can't get my calculator to work, it's just acting weird. That's what I do, is I do second plus sign 7, 1, 2, and just get it back to the original factory setting, and usually it works out a lot of the glitches. Okay? So we got that all set. Let's hit our y equals button. And what we want to do is we want to plug in x squared minus 4x plus 5. Remember, that's the equation that we wanted to graph. Okay? We're looking for the zeros. We adjusted the window back to factory settings, and now we're telling it, please graph this for us. Now I'm going to drop my calculator down and move the camera just a little bit closer. Okay? So you can see that. Sorry for a little bit of a glare there. I'll try and move that. See if I can get that out of there. Okay. All right, there we go. I think that helps a little bit. Okay. Now, are we close enough to see that this particular equation never crosses the x-axis? Can you see that it just does not cross? So hopefully what you're seeing is what I'm seeing. I don't have any x-intercepts. So therefore, this particular problem has no zeros at all. So I can go to that. I showed you in a previous video how you can go to this. You press second graph, and it'll take you to the table, and we're looking for any numbers that show when y is 0. That's what we're looking for. And so you can scroll up, and you'll see that at no point in time, y comes all the way down to, it looks like the lowest number it goes is 1, and then it goes right back up to 2 again. It never descends low enough for y to be 0. What that tells you is, oh, there's no x-intercepts. Plus, the picture shows you that as well. Now, let's say you're a little too far away, and you're like, I can't tell if it's touching the x-axis. Is it above the x-axis? You can press the zoom button. Okay. So if we hit zoom, we're going to tell it to zoom in. We want to get a little bit closer, and it's going to pop up a little cursor, and we're going to move that cursor right where we want to see it. We want to see the bottom of that curve there. So you're going to press enter, okay? And it's just bringing that graph really uber close. Can you really see it now? Wow, it clearly does not cross the x-axis. And this particular parabola doesn't have any zeros, and that's okay. So anyway, let me flip back to our notes, and I gave you some information. Plug in the equation using the y equals button, okay, and then press the button graph. We had talked about adjusting the window, okay, and doing factory setting. If you want to do any type of reset, then you're going to hit second plus the plus sign, and then press 7, 1, 2, and that'll do a factory reset. So if you want to put that in your notes, you can. And then I showed you how to use the zoom button. We even looked at the table to see if we could find it on the table at all. So, and we couldn't. So basically, this particular parabola has no zeros, and that's what we ascertained. The calculator showed that to us very clearly. All right, guess what? You guys get extra credit here. So DEF is all you. I want you, do not do these by hand. I want you to do these on the calculator, okay? And use your zoom button, use your table function, graph it on the calculator, see what you can do, kind of play with it. You won't get better at something unless you practice. So I want you to practice, and I'm going to give 1 point for each one you get right if you can identify for each the zeros. So 1 point for each for a total of 3. Okay, so this will be a +1, this will be a +1, and this will be a +1. If you can correctly identify the zeros. Okay, so rewind me if you kind of missed out on the keying sequence earlier. It's fine, don't worry about it. I'm sure you did a great job. Just rewind, look at it again, okay, and practice with me. Put me on pause and just practice the keying sequences until you get comfortable. And then bring questions to class, and I'll be happy to answer them.